The Empire's armada hung in the void like a crown of steel, endless rows of vessels arrayed in symmetrical precision. Their commander lounged in his command chair, one clawed hand tapping the armrest as he stared at the tactical hologram. His name, translated clumsily into human tongue, would have been Caliph Verne. To his crew, he was the Razor of the Outer Reach, a veteran of 27 campaigns, undefeated, unshaken, revered. His expression, however, carried not intensity, but boredom. "Another primitive outpost," he muttered, his mandibles twitching in mild disdain. "How many of these does their species even scatter across the void?" A junior officer straightened, uncertain whether the question required an answer. Caliph's lips curled in irritation. "Never mind. I know the truth. They multiply like vermin." His voice carried through the bridge with that peculiar blend of arrogance and laziness that only victors too long, unchallenged, could manage. The crew laughed on cue, but it was hollow, practiced. The Empire's war machine had grown so vast, so automatic, that battles no longer felt like contests. They were butcheries, repeated endlessly until Caliph wondered if he commanded ships or slaughterhouses. Yet procedure demanded every raid be carried out as though it mattered. And so he performed the motions, drifting from one weak world to the next, erasing resistance that barely deserved the name. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing as the hologram magnified. Ahead spun a small, human-occupied planet, no central capital, no orbital defenses worthy of the term. A fragile installation hovered in orbit, little more than a glorified refueling dock. Caliph exhaled in something close to disappointment. "Is this what they send us now? This is sport for hatchlings, not admirals." The communications officer looked uneasy. "They've issued no distress calls, Commander. Sensors suggest the installation is inactive." "Inactive?" Caliph rose from his seat with deliberate slowness. His posture, rigid and sharp, silenced every whisper on the bridge. "Do you suggest the humans have grown wise enough to abandon their baubles before we arrive?" The officer flinched. "No, Commander. Merely unusual." Caliph considered. Unusual. Humans were not unusual. They were predictable, soft-bodied, stubborn to the point of idiocy, but never imaginative enough to surprise. Market for destruction. Let us remind them their little seeds of civilization have no soil in this galaxy. Orders flowed like clockwork. The fleet aligned, missiles armed, plasma batteries primed. The procedure, honed across 100 years of conquest, unfolded without urgency. The crew knew resistance would be brief, perhaps a few squadrons of outdated fighters, certainly nothing to threaten an Empire fleet. As the countdown began, Caliph allowed himself a private smile. He had once felt exhilaration in moments like this, the anticipation of crushing defiance, the thunder of weapons against fragile hulls. Now it had all dulled. He longed for an adversary who could make him feel alive again. The first volley streaked across the void, a storm of fire and energy lancing toward the orbital dock. The human structure did not respond. No counterfire. No desperate launches. Nothing but silence. The bridge filled with murmurs. Even Caliph's confidence flickered at the edges. He gestured sharply, cutting the noise. "They are frozen with fear. Common enough among lesser species. Continue bombardment." The second volley struck. The installation shuddered, burning under the rain of plasma, but no transmissions came. No escape craft darted free. The silence grew unnatural, pressing on the crew like a weight. Caliph's eyes narrowed. "Scan again. Something is wrong." The sensors whispered back data streams. The readings made no sense. The installation was not entirely what it appeared. Beneath its crude facade lay layered alloys beyond human metallurgy. Hidden power signatures pulsed faintly, as though a sleeping giant stirred. "Commander," the science officer stammered, "the structure it is not a refueling dock. It is masking something, an energy source I cannot quantify. Enormous, contained." Caliph felt the faintest thrill in his chest, a sensation he had not known in decades, unease. He masked it with a sneer. "So the cattle build clever barns. It changes nothing. Increase firepower." The next barrage lit the void with brilliance, tearing the outer shell apart. Yet when the light cleared, what emerged was no wreckage but a gleaming silhouette, smooth and deliberate, as though forged for war in silence. It dwarfed the installation, unfolding like a blade unsheathed. Its hull shimmered with a darkness that drank in starlight, unmarked by the Empire's bombardment. The bridge fell silent. Every officer stared. Calith's mandibles clicked involuntarily. "What is that?" No one answered. The vessel drifted forward, deliberate, alive in its stillness. Then, without fanfare, a voice spoke. Not shouted, not panicked. "Come, measured human. You have trespassed in restricted territory. Withdraw immediately. This is your only warning." The words echoed across every channel, translated perfectly, leaving no room for misunderstanding. The tone was not pleading. It was not desperate. It was cold, as if the humans already knew how this confrontation would end. For the first time in years, Calith did not laugh. He felt a chill creep along his spine. Something in the voice told him this was not another raid, not another slaughter. This was different. This was dangerous. Still, pride forced his reply. "This is Calith Vaern of the Razored Fleet. You dare threaten the Empire with a single ship." His voice regained its edge, but it rang thinner now, stretched taut by a doubt he refused to name. The human voice answered without hesitation. "We do not threaten. We promise." The bridge air grew heavy, as though the void itself waited. Calith studied the shadowed warship, its alien design both elegant and terrifying, and for the first time in his long career, he wondered if the Empire had made a mistake too great to erase. The fleet prepared to fire again, but Calith's claws trembled against the armrest. He told himself it was eagerness, but in his chest, a truth burned cold. This was no refueling dock. This was no routine conquest. This was the beginning of something the galaxy was not ready to face. And though he would never admit it aloud, part of him felt alive again, because for the first time, he might have found an enemy worthy of fear. The silence that followed the human transmission lingered like smoke after a fire, curling into the lungs of every officer on Calith's bridge. He wanted to bark an order to lash out with the full fury of his fleet and remind his crew that fear had no place in an Empire warship. Yet the words lodged in his throat. The ship before them moved with no haste, no bluster. Its restraint unsettled him more than any display of strength could. "Target that vessel," Calith snapped at last, his tone sharper than steel. The hesitation in his voice did not escape his officers, though none dared acknowledge it. Weapons locked, and energy surged across the armada. 1,000 guns spoke in unison, lances of plasma and missiles streaking into the void. They struck the prototype in waves, detonations flaring bright enough to cast long shadows across the alien bridge. When the firestorm cleared, the ship remained, untouched, serene, its hull absorbing punishment as though it had been designed to humiliate every Empire weapon system at once. Murmurs rippled through the crew. Calith crushed them with a glare. Continue the assault. It must break eventually. But it did not. Instead, the human warship moved for the first time. Not fast, not aggressive, simply deliberate. Its cannons flared in short bursts, each shot surgical. Empire cruisers vanished from the tactical hologram in silence, erased with no wasted fire. One moment they existed, proud and confident. The next, they were debris drifting in mute surrender. Calith's mandibles clenched. Impossible. Their metallurgy, their energy capacity, this cannot belong to humans. His words betrayed something he had never voiced before, disbelief. The ship's calm voice returned, this time direct, almost conversational. "You were warned." One of Calith's senior lieutenants swallowed hard. "Commander, they destroyed 4 cruisers with 6 shots." His voice cracked, and Calith silenced him with a hiss. Yet even Calith could not ignore the growing truth. Precision of this scale was not accident, but mastery. He turned his gaze to the tactical displays. The prototype did not swarm them with numbers. It did not attempt intimidation through raw firepower. It simply dismantled the Empire's fleet piece by piece, as though dissecting a specimen. There was artistry in its restraint, cruelty in its calmness. Calith forced himself to study it, to smother fear with analysis. The Empire had thrived by knowing enemies better than they knew themselves. But nothing about this ship matched the profile of human capabilities. Its energy readings shifted like tides, wormhole traces appeared where no drive signature should be, and its AI-controlled drones sliced through Empire fighters with machine indifference. A thought whispered at the back of his mind. Perhaps the Empire's scholars had been wrong. Perhaps humans had hidden their claws, playing prey until the galaxy grew careless. The bridge quaked as another capital ship erupted on the hologram, cut apart with surgical beams. Calith caught his reflection in the polished surface of his chair, eyes wide, posture taut, a predator who had just tasted his first drop of fear. He despised the image. "Pull the fleet back," he ordered, the words tasting like ash. Gasps broke out. No Empire commander had ever uttered such a command against humans. Retreat was unthinkable, dishonor worse than death. Yet the surviving ships obeyed. The Empire prized obedience above all, and if Caelith's pride faltered, his authority had not. The warship did not pursue. It watched, waiting, like a beast confident its prey could never truly escape. That night, alone in his quarters, Caelith studied the battle logs. He replayed every moment, frame by frame, analyzing the warship's movements. What disturbed him most was not its technology, but its intent. Humans had not fought with desperation. They had fought with patience, with precision, with knowledge that every shot mattered. This was not the chaos of a desperate race defending its homeworld. This was strategy. Curiosity gnawed at him, stronger than fear. He accessed restricted archives, searching for patterns in human warfare. The Empire kept records of conquered species, a gallery of histories stripped bare. For centuries, humans had been dismissed as provincial aggressors, fighting endless internal wars with crude weapons. Yet as Caelith scrolled through the footage, his breath slowed. He saw trenches drowned in mud, cities reduced to ash by firestorms, oceans poisoned with steel. He watched men and women fighting not for empire or glory, but because surrender meant extinction. Their weapons changed across eras, swords to rifles, cannons to missiles, but their expression never did. Grim, determined, unyielding. The final recording was archival footage of a human officer, centuries old, staring into a primitive camera. His voice, scratchy with static, carried a message that felt aimed across time. "We don't start wars, but if you push us far enough, we end them." Caelith closed the terminal. His claws trembled as they rested on the desk. He despised weakness, but this was not weakness. It was clarity. The humans were not reacting to Empire aggression. They had prepared for it, waited for it, perhaps even lured it. When he returned to the bridge the next cycle, his crew expected fury. Instead, he carried a quietness they had never seen. His orders were precise, measured, absent of arrogance. He no longer mocked his prey. Still, pride warred with reason. He would not abandon the campaign without proof. The Empire must see what he had seen, must confront this revelation. He would drag the truth into their halls, even if it shattered him. As the prototype warship receded into the darkness, unpursued, Caelith knew the balance of power had shifted. Not completely, not yet, but the first stone had cracked from the Empire's wall of certainty. He turned once more to the void where the ship had vanished. "Who are you really?" he whispered, though no one dared answer. The silence, heavier than before, promised only that he would find out. The Empire's council chamber was carved from obsidian and arrogance. Its ceiling arched high enough to make voices echo with unintended fragility, though no one within would admit to sounding small. Caelith stood before the assembled senators, his uniform immaculate despite the weeks of battle that weighed on him. He presented the tactical recordings, each frame a condemnation of their certainty. The images spoke for themselves. Their fleet's proud bombardment dissolving into nothing. The human warship moving like a phantom, striking with impossible precision. The final retreat, unthinkable in any other context, forced upon them by a single vessel. When the last projection dimmed, silence followed. It was the kind that carried not awe but dismissal. One senator clicked his mandibles in irritation. "An anomaly," he declared. "A statistical impossibility. One vessel cannot change the truth of an empire." Others agreed, voices layering until the chamber grew thick with denial. Caelith's claws dug into his palms. "It is not anomaly. It is design. You think humans scatter colonies out of desperation? They scatter them as bait. We were not conquering. They were waiting for us to make the first mistake." Laughter rippled across the seats, cruel and sharp. Another senator leaned forward, his voice oily with disdain. "You admit to retreating before one ship, Admiral. Perhaps the shame of your failure has warped your judgment." Caelith's mandibles twitched. He wanted to roar to break decorum, but he forced his voice steady. "You mistake pride for strength. I tell you now, this is not my failure. This is our warning. Humanity is not prey. They are predators pretending otherwise." His words dissolved into the chamber, like smoke into wind. He knew he had lost them. The council wanted certainty, not truth. They dismissed him, voting instead to gather an even greater fleet, to smother humanity with sheer numbers. Caelith left in silence, the echo of his own footsteps the only agreement he would receive. Far from the capital, humanity's preparations deepened. In subterranean bunkers and orbital shipyards hidden behind false signals, engineers worked without pause. The prototype had not been a lone miracle but the spear point of a doctrine years in the making. Captain Arya Cade, commanding officer of the warship Aegis, walked her vessel's corridors with a calmness that masked exhaustion. She had been chosen not for politics, but for her unyielding clarity under pressure. To her, war was not glory but mathematics, variables of survival, probability of annihilation. She carried the burden of command not as a crown, but as a weight pressing on her every word. Her crew looked to her with something beyond loyalty, belief. They had seen her hold the line when the Empire's firestorm should have broken them. They had felt her steadiness when the galaxy mocked humanity as backward. Now, with every drill and every silence, they absorbed her certainty that they could not afford to lose. "Enemy fleets will come," she told them during a briefing, her voice stripped of flourish. "They will come in numbers we cannot match. That does not matter. We fight as they cannot, unseen, unrelenting, precise. One strike for every weakness, one wound they cannot close. We will not bleed them dry. We will show them they are already hollow." Her words did not ignite cheers. They ignited stillness, the kind born of soldiers who understood survival was victory enough. The day the Empire's great armada arrived, the void seemed to tremble. Hundreds of ships, gleaming with the Empire's confidence, fell into formation like an iron wall stretching across the stars. Their commanders mocked humanity openly, broadcasting messages of surrender demands. Caliph, forced to accompany the armada as an observer, felt only dread. On the tactical board, the human fleet seemed pitiful. One prototype warship, a handful of escorts, too few to withstand even the Empire's forward scouts. Yet Captain Cade stood on her bridge with eyes sharp and unblinking. The first Empire volley darkened the stars. But before it struck, wormholes bloomed like wounds in space. Entire salvos vanished into nothing, redirected to empty coordinates light years away. Empire ships collided with their own ordnance, confusion spreading faster than orders could contain it. Then the counterattack began. Not with the thunder of massed fleets, but with whispers of annihilation. Drones emerged from wormholes behind enemy lines, slicing into capital ships with precision that mocked their armor. Coordinated strikes cut command vessels in half, leaving formations leaderless. The Empire's size, once strength, became chaos. Caliph watched as captains screamed over comms, their orders drowned by panic. For all their numbers, they fought blind, while the humans seemed to see every move before it happened. He realized then that humanity had studied them, not as enemies, but as prey studies a predator's habits, until the moment came to turn teeth against throat. On the Aegis, Captain Cade never raised her voice. She issued commands like a surgeon guiding a scalpel. Her crew obeyed with the certainty of inevitability. Where the Empire stumbled, they cut deeper. Where the Empire massed, they vanished into wormholes only to reappear at the heart of the formation. The battle did not roar. It unraveled. One Empire fleet fractured, then another. A dreadnought, centerpiece of their armada, detonated from within as human saboteurs triggered buried code in its systems. The explosion rippled across the battlefield, a sun briefly born and extinguished. Caliph's claws dug into his chair as he listened to the death cries of his Empire's finest. Around him, officers pleaded for guidance, but he had no answers left. His warnings had become prophecy, and prophecy had been ignored. At last, the Council's arrogance met reality. Their fleets, once infinite, now scattered into wreckage. Their certainty shattered. And through it all, the human warship remained untouched calm, precise, inevitable. Caliph lowered his head, not in defeat, but in recognition. This was the end of something larger than a battle. The Empire was witnessing the collapse of its illusion of dominance. Humanity had revealed itself not as a victim, but as a force the galaxy had never truly seen. And though the void still burned with debris, Caliph knew the real war had only just begun. The battlefield was no longer a field at all, but a graveyard of light and silence. The Empire's once unstoppable armada drifted in ruin, its shattered hulls tumbling like broken idols. Fires bled across the void, dim against the cold vastness, yet enough to mark the death of centuries of arrogance. Among the wreckage, the Aegis glided with quiet purpose, its hull unscarred, its engines steady, its presence more terrifying in restraint than in fire. Captain Arya Cade stood at the center of her bridge, surrounded by officers who had seen the impossible and yet did not cheer. Their faces reflected exhaustion, awe, and something deeper, the weight of having changed history with their own hands. Cade's voice broke the silence with calm finality. Signal the survivors. Offer terms of surrender. No pursuit. Her communications officer hesitated. Captain, they'll regroup. Some of them may still fight. Then let them decide, Cade said, eyes never leaving the tactical display. If they continue, we'll end it. But if they yield, we gain more than their silence, we gain their obedience. It was not cruelty in her tone, nor triumph. It was calculation, cold and human, born from centuries of struggle, where mercy was not weakness, but strategy. On one of the remaining Empire cruisers, Caliph sat in the gloom of his fractured bridge, smoke curling around him. His officers waited for commands, their faces pale with disbelief, but he had none left to give. Pride had abandoned him long before the first dreadnought fell. He stared at the incoming transmission, the human voice reaching him once again, serene, unyielding. Withdraw or surrender. This is your final choice. The words held no malice. That was what unsettled him most. Humans did not gloat. They did not demand vengeance for lost colonies or lives. They simply stated reality, as though inevitability itself spoke through them. Caliph rose slowly, his movements stiff with defeat, and ordered the transmission opened. Captain Cade's image appeared, her gaze steady, her uniform immaculate despite the battle that had torn galaxies apart. He studied her in silence, searching for weakness, but found only clarity. You could have destroyed us all, Caliph said, his voice low. We still can, she replied without arrogance, her words as level as if she discussed weather. But destruction is wasteful. You are beaten, Admiral. Not because you lack numbers, not because you lack courage, but because you underestimated what desperation and patience forge in us. Your empire will surrender its fleets. It will stand down, and those who remain will live. Caliph's mandibles tightened. And if we refuse? Cade's eyes did not flicker. Then you will not remain. For a long time, the void filled the silence between them. Caliph felt the weight of every ancestor, every doctrine of conquest that had shaped his kind. To bow was unthinkable, yet he saw no path forward. The Empire's power was already broken. The humans had not just defeated them, they had revealed them to be fragile, a colossus built on fear rather than strength. He inclined his head, a gesture that tasted of ashes. Very well, I yield. But know this, what you've done today will be remembered with terror across the stars. That, Cade said softly, is the point. The surrender cascaded through the remnants of the Empire's fleet like cracks spreading through glass. One by one, warships powered down their weapons, their crews whispering of a future in which humans no longer crouched in the shadows of giants, but stood taller than them all. Back on the Aegis, the crew sat in stunned quiet. Victory felt heavy, not triumphant. They had expected to fight, perhaps even to die, but not to become the new axis around which the galaxy now turned. Cade watched their faces and understood the truth. They had not merely won a war. They had awakened a reality that could never be put back to sleep. Caliph was taken aboard under guard, though Cade treated him not as a prisoner, but as a guest. In her quarters, the two stood across from one another, silence taut as steel wire. At last, she asked, "Do you understand now why we let you strike first?" His eyes narrowed. You lured us. You played weak to draw us into overconfidence. Not just you, she said. The galaxy. For centuries we've been dismissed as primitive, fractured, unworthy. But we remember every invasion, every war we waged against ourselves. We learned from them, and we waited until the galaxy made the mistake of learning nothing. Caliph exhaled slowly. You speak like conquerors. No, Kay corrected, her gaze hard as iron. We speak like survivors. But survival, when sharpened long enough, looks very much the same. Something shifted in him then. Not loyalty, not admiration, but recognition. He had spent a life believing in the inevitability of empire dominance, in the theater of invincible fleets and ancient arrogance. Now he stood before a woman who had dismantled it all with patience and precision. She had not just defeated him, she had stripped away the illusion he had served. You'll need someone who knows the Empire, he said at last, the words tasting of surrender, yet not entirely devoid of dignity. Someone who understands how fear works inside its bones. Cade regarded him for a long moment. Perhaps, she said, but remember, you serve us now, Admiral. Not the Empire, not your pride. Humanity. The admission burned him, but he bowed his head. Then humanity it is. Outside, the galaxy shifted. The Empire's colonies rioted, sensing weakness. Neighboring species whispered in council halls, realizing that the balance of power had ended not with a treaty, but with a single warship's shadow. The myth of human frailty was dead. In its place rose a new truth, cold and certain. Humanity was awake. On the Aegis, Cade stood alone at the viewport, watching the stars wheel silently. She felt no triumph, only the weight of inevitability pressing upon her. They had not sought this war, yet now it bound them to a future that could not be undone. Humanity had shown its teeth, and the galaxy would never forget. Her reflection stared back at her from a glass, eyes colder than she remembered. For a moment she wondered if this was victory, or simply another beginning. Then she whispered into the silence, words meant for no one but herself. We didn't want this. But now that we have it, the galaxy had better be ready. The stars offered no answer, only their endless witness. And in that vast silence, the future of every world trembled, for the age of humanity had begun.